In October 1919, the greatest baseball team in the world did the unthinkable. They didn't just lose the World Series, they sold it. Major League Baseball wasn't just a game in 1919. It was America's sacred religion. It was the ultimate symbol of purity and fair play. However, behind the scenes, a toxic mix of player resentment, corporate greed, and underworld mob money was brewing. 8 players took the field with a secret that would shatter the trust of an entire nation. This wasn't just a loss, it was an execution of baseball's integrity. It involved the most dominant hitters of the dead ball era, the country's most ruthless gangsters, and a betrayal so deep it permanently banned 8 men from the game they loved. This is the tragic, definitive story of the day baseball lost its innocence. Let's pull back the curtain on baseball's ultimate sin, the 1919 Black Sox Scandal. The 1919 Chicago White Sox were a powerhouse, heavily favored to crush the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. However, inside the clubhouse, the team was fractured by bitter resentment. The source of their anger, you might ask? Their owner, Charles Comiskey. Charles Comiskey was a notoriously cheap Major League Baseball owner. He underpaid his superstar players and famously forced them to pay for their own uniform laundering. Charles Comiskey left his players looking so dirty they were nicknamed the Black Sox before the scandal began, and reneged on promised bonuses. Sensing the deep anger, small-time gamblers approached modern players like first baseman Chick Scandel. The proposition was simple: lose the World Series on purpose and make more money in a week than Charles Comiskey paid in a year. Chick Scandel rallied 7 teammates, including ace pitcher Eddie Cicotte and legendary Shoeless Joe Jackson. They needed serious backing, which came from the shadows of New York City's kingpin of crime, Arnold Rothstein, and the fix was on. The signal to the gamblers happened on the very first pitch of Game 1 of the World Series. White Sox pitcher Eddie Cicotte wound up and drove the ball directly into the back of Cincinnati batter Maury Rath. It was a predetermined proof that the players were compliant. What followed was a masterclass of subtle sabotage. Star players purposely misjudging fly balls, threw wide of target bases, and struck out with runners in scoring position. To the untrained eye, it looked like a string of bad luck. However, inside the press box, iconic sports writers like Ring Larder and Hugh Fullerton noticed something deeply wrong. The heavily favored Sox were dropping games they should have won in their sleep. Rumors began to swirl through the stands, turning the celebration of sport into a crime scene in broad daylight. The players won a few games late in the series out of fear that the gamblers wouldn't pay them. However, the Reds ultimately took the World Series title. For nearly a decade, the secret held. However, by late 1920, the weight of the lie crushed the conspirators, and a grand jury was called to investigate. Eddie Cicotte broke down in tears, confessing everything, and Shoeless Joe Jackson signed a confession stating he took $5,000. Legend has it that as Shoeless Joe Jackson left the courthouse, a heartbroken young boy clutched his sleeve and cried, "Say it ain't so, Joe." However, a court of law ultimately acquitted all the players due to missing evidence, and Major League Baseball had to save itself from ruin. In 1920, Major League Baseball appointed its very first commissioner, Kenshaw Mountain Landis. His first act was ruthless. He banned all 8 players from professional baseball for life. The permanent ban saved the integrity of Major League Baseball at the time. However, It left a trail of broken lives. Men like Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the greatest natural hitters to ever live, were entirely erased from the history books, exiled from the only life they ever knew. The Chicago Black Sox spent their remaining decades in the shadows, haunted by a single week of desperation. Were these 8 men greedy villains, or were they victims of an abusive owner and ruthless gangsters? Shoeless Joe Jackson officially became eligible for the National Baseball Hall of Fame in May 2025. Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred updated the policy to end permanently ineligible bans upon players' deaths. The earliest we could see Shoeless Joe Jackson inducted into the Hall of Fame by the Hall's Classic Era Committee is December 2027. So now, we would love to hear from you and know what you think. Tell us in the comments below, should Shoeless Joe Jackson be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame? If this tragic piece of baseball history, the 1919 Black Sox Scandal, moved you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to Baseball Legends Chronicles. As always, thanks for watching.